The music scraped out of a fiddle that had seen better days, and Adelaide Vance stood against the pine-planked wall of the territorial hall, watching couples spin past while trying to fold herself into something less. Republic, Washington Territory, had been her home for 6 months now, ever since her father moved them west to work the new railroad depot, and in those 6 months, she had learned every trick for making 5 feet 11 inches seem smaller. She kept her shoulders rounded forward, let her spine curve, wore flat boots even though every other woman her age clattered across the floor in heeled shoes that made their skirts swing prettier. At 22, she had practiced the art of disappearing while standing in plain sight, and it had become second nature to hunch just enough that men did not have to crane their necks to meet her eyes. "Look at her," someone said behind Adelaide, and she did not need to turn to know they were talking about her. "Standing there like a fence post. Poor thing probably has not danced all night. Who would ask her?" Another voice replied. "She is taller than half the men here, and when she laughs you can hear it clear across the room. My mother says she lacks refinement." Adelaide felt her throat tighten, the familiar burn of tears she refused to shed. She had heard variations of this conversation in every town her family had lived in from Ohio to Kansas to here. Too tall, too loud, too much. The words followed her like a shadow, and she had learned to believe them because everyone seemed to agree they were true. The song ended, and couples broke apart, the men escorting their partners back to chairs along the opposite wall where the respectable women gathered. Adelaide stayed where she was, half hidden behind a support beam, and tried to remember what it felt like before she understood she was wrong somehow, built incorrectly, too big for the world to accommodate comfortably. "You planning to hold up that post all night, or are you going to dance?" The voice came from her left, deep and steady, and Adelaide turned to find a man watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He was not especially tall, maybe 5'10", with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. His clothes were clean but worn, a working man's Sunday best, and his eyes were the color of creek stones. "I do not dance much," Adelaide said, which was a polite way of saying no one had asked. "That seems like a waste," the man said. He held out his hand. "Daniel Whitmore. I run a cattle operation about 10 miles north of town." Adelaide hesitated, then shook his hand briefly, feeling how rough his palm was, calloused from ropes and leather. "Adelaide Vance." "I know," Daniel said. "Your father works at the depot. You helped sort freight last month when that shipment got mixed up." She remembered that day, how the station master had been overwhelmed, and her father had volunteered her help, how she had spent 6 hours moving crates and calling out inventory numbers in a voice that carried clear across the loading platform. She had not realized anyone was watching. "I did not mean to be so loud," Adelaide said automatically. "I know my voice carries." Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. It was efficient, got the job done in half the time it might have taken otherwise. He gestured toward the dance floor where couples were lining up for a reel. "Dance with me." It was not quite a question, but his tone was not demanding either. Adelaide felt panic flutter in her chest. "I am not very good at dancing." "Neither am I," Daniel said, "but the music is playing and it seems a shame to waste it." Before Adelaide could manufacture another excuse, he took her hand and led her onto the floor. She went stiffly, aware of eyes turning toward them, aware of how her head came level with his and would be higher if she were wearing heels like a normal woman. She started to hunch her shoulders, but Daniel's hand settled at her back, firm and grounding. "Stand up straight," he said quietly. "I cannot dance with someone who is folding in half." Adelaide straightened reflexively, and suddenly they were eye to eye. She waited for him to look uncomfortable, to make some joke about needing a step stool. But Daniel just nodded as if satisfied and began to move as the music started. He had not lied about not being good at dancing. His steps were functional rather than graceful, and twice he counted the beat out loud to keep time, but there was something solid and reliable about the way he moved. Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly, letting him guide her through the turns even though she was terribly aware of how much space she took up, how her skirt probably looked shorter on her than it should, how her arms felt too long. "You're thinking too hard," Daniel said. "I can practically hear your thoughts from here." "I am thinking that I do not fit very well," Adelaide admitted, then wished she had kept her mouth shut. "Fit what? This?" Adelaide gestured vaguely. "Dancing, social gatherings, any of it." Daniel was quiet for a moment as they turned through a corner. "You fit fine. Everyone else just has poor spatial awareness." It was such an unexpected thing to say that Adelaide laughed, a real laugh that came up from her chest before she could stop it, loud and bright. Several heads turned and Adelaide felt her face heat with embarrassment. She tried to swallow the sound to make herself quiet again, but Daniel was grinning at her. "There," he said. "That is better." "I am too loud," Adelaide said, the words automatic after years of hearing them. "People are staring." "People always stare at something," Daniel said. "Might as well give them something worth looking at." The dance ended before Adelaide could figure out how to respond to that. Daniel bowed slightly, courteous, and Adelaide curtsied awkwardly, still flustered. She expected him to walk away now, duty done, but instead he stayed beside her as the fiddler announced a break. "Would you like some punch?" Daniel asked. "It tastes like raspberries and regret, but it is wet." Adelaide found herself smiling despite everything. "That sounds tolerable." They made their way to the refreshment table, and Adelaide was painfully aware of the looks following them. She could see the other women whispering behind their fans, see the men along the wall exchanging glances. Daniel either did not notice or did not care. He ladled punch into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "How long have you been in Republic?" Adelaide asked, desperate to fill the silence with something other than her own spiraling thoughts. 3 years, Daniel said. "Came out from Missouri with my brother. He went back east after the first winter, decided ranching was not for him. I stayed." "Do you like it?" "Most days." Daniel took a sip of punch and made a face. "The work is hard but honest. The land is good. The winters are long and the summers are short, but there is something about this place that feels right." Adelaide nodded. She did not feel that way about Republic yet, but she had not felt right anywhere in so long that she had stopped expecting to. "Miss Vance." A woman's voice cut across the hall, sharp and bright. Adelaide turned to see Margaret Finch approaching, her daughter Rosalind trailing behind her. Margaret was one of the town's leading matrons, the wife of the largest landowner in the territory, and she had opinions about everything. "Mrs. Finch," Adelaide said, trying to smile. Margaret's gaze flicked from Adelaide to Daniel and back again, her expression turning calculating. "I saw you dancing, dear. How nice that Mr. Whitmore was charitable enough to take a turn with you." The word charitable hit like a slap. Adelaide felt her smile freeze in place. "He was very kind." "Daniel is always kind," Margaret said, her tone suggesting this was a character flaw. "Though I am sure he would enjoy dancing with someone more his height, would you not, Mr. Whitmore? Rosalind is looking for a partner, and she is such a delicate little thing." Rosalind had the grace to look embarrassed. She was indeed delicate, barely 5 feet tall with blonde curls and a heart-shaped face. She looked exactly like what a woman was supposed to look like, and Adelaide felt something wither inside her chest. "I am fine where I am," Daniel said flatly. Margaret's smile tightened. "Of course. I only thought Miss Vance might prefer to sit with the other ladies. Standing so much must be tiring for someone of her stature. Adelaide wanted to sink through the floorboards. She started to excuse herself, to retreat to the wall where she belonged, but Daniel's hand touched her elbow, light and steady. Adelaide was just telling me about the freight sorting, Daniel said, his voice conversational but with an edge Adelaide had not heard before. She organized 3 weeks of backed-up shipments in a single afternoon. That takes real capability. How industrious, Margaret said, making industrious sound like something faintly scandalous. Though I hardly think freight sorting is appropriate conversation for a social gathering. Why not? Daniel asked. Seems more interesting than discussing who wore what dress. Margaret's face flushed, and Adelaide felt a wild urge to laugh. Before the conversation could deteriorate further, the fiddler struck up another tune and Daniel turned to Adelaide. "Another dance?" he asked. Adelaide should have said no. Should have retreated, made herself small again, disappeared. But something in Daniel's steady gaze made her nod instead, and they returned to the floor. This time she paid less attention to the steps and more attention to the man guiding her through them. Daniel moved with quiet confidence, not flashy but certain, and he did not seem bothered by the fact that they were eye to eye. If anything, he seemed to prefer it. He talked while they danced, asking her questions about Ohio, about what freight sorting actually entailed, about whether she had read any of the new novels that had come through the depot. "I read everything I can get my hands on," Adelaide admitted. "My mother says I should spend less time reading and more time learning to be agreeable." "Are you disagreeable?" Daniel asked, sounding genuinely curious. "I have opinions," Adelaide said. "That apparently amounts to the same thing." "I like people with opinions," Daniel said. "Makes conversations more interesting." They danced 2 more songs, and by the third Adelaide had almost forgotten to worry about how she looked. Daniel kept her talking, kept her engaged, and when she laughed at something he said, he did not flinch at the sound. He just grinned and said something else amusing, as if her laughter was exactly what he had been hoping for. The evening was winding down when Adelaide finally excused herself to find her father. She located him near the door, talking to the station master, and stood quietly beside him while they finished their discussion of rail schedules. Daniel had disappeared somewhere, and Adelaide felt oddly deflated now that he was gone. "You looked like you were having a good time," her father said as they walked back to their small house on the edge of town. "That Whitmore fellow seems decent." "He was kind," Adelaide said, then winced at her own word choice. Her father glanced at her. "You do that a lot, you know." "Diminish yourself." "I do not mean to, I know." Her father sighed. "Your mother and I should have done better by you, Adelaide. Let you be who you are instead of trying to sand down your edges." Adelaide did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They walked the rest of the way in silence, and Adelaide went to bed still feeling the ghost of Daniel's hand at her back, the memory of his voice saying she fit fine. The next week passed in the ordinary rhythm of territorial life. Adelaide helped her mother with laundry and mending, assisted her father at the depot when shipments came in, and tried not to think too much about the dance. She told herself it had been a single evening, a moment of kindness from a man who probably felt sorry for her, nothing more. But on Saturday afternoon, Daniel rode into town and appeared at the depot while Adelaide was updating inventory logs. "Afternoon," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Adelaide looked up, startled. "Mr. Whitmore." "Daniel," he corrected. "Mr. Whitmore makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and discussing grain futures." Adelaide set down her pen. "Is there something I can help you with? Are you expecting a shipment?" "Not exactly." Daniel pushed away from the door frame and came closer. "I was wondering if you would like to come see the ranch." Adelaide blinked. "Your ranch? That is the one." Daniel's expression was open, hopeful. "I thought you might enjoy getting out of town for an afternoon. The ride is pretty this time of year, and my housekeeper makes excellent pie." "I do not think," Adelaide started, then stopped. She had been about to make an excuse to decline politely, but something made her hesitate. "Why? Why what? Why are you asking me?" Daniel looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because I enjoyed talking to you at the dance. Because I would like to spend more time with you. Is that not how this usually works?" "Not in my experience," Adelaide said honestly. Daniel's expression softened. "Then maybe your experience has been with the wrong people." He held out his hand. "Come see the ranch, Adelaide. If you hate it, I will bring you straight back. But I think you might like it." Adelaide looked at his outstretched hand, at his patient face, at the genuine interest in his eyes. She thought about all the times she had made herself small, all the years she had spent believing she was too much. Then she thought about how it had felt to dance without hunching, to laugh without immediately apologizing. "All right," she said, and took his hand. The ride north out of Republic was indeed beautiful. The territory in late spring was green and wild, with mountains rising blue in the distance and wildflowers dotting the grassland. Daniel rode a sturdy bay gelding and had brought a gentle mare for Adelaide, and as they left the town behind, Adelaide felt something loosen in her chest. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they rode side by side along the wagon road. "It is not fancy," Daniel said. "About 500 acres, maybe 200 head of cattle. I have a foreman named Jack who has been working ranches since before I was born, and 3 hands who help with the daily work. The house is small but solid. I built most of it myself the first year. That must have been hard work." "It was good work," Daniel corrected. "The kind where you can see what you have accomplished at the end of the day. I like that." They talked easily as they rode, the conversation ranging from ranching to books to the peculiarities of territorial politics. Daniel was well read despite his rough hands, and he listened to Adelaide's opinions without interrupting or dismissing them. When she got passionate about a point, her voice rising with enthusiasm, he did not tell her to quiet down. He just nodded and asked follow-up questions, as if her thoughts were worth engaging with. The ranch, when they reached it, was exactly as Daniel had described. Functional rather than fancy, but well-maintained and clearly built with care. The house was a single-story structure with a wide porch, and the barn and outbuildings were painted a cheerful red. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and chickens scratched in a yard near the house. "This is wonderful," Adelaide said, and meant it. Daniel looked pleased. "Come inside. I will introduce you to Mrs. Carson." Mrs. Carson turned out to be a formidable woman in her 50s who ran Daniel's household with brisk efficiency. She looked Adelaide up and down when they entered the kitchen, then nodded as if satisfied. "About time you brought someone sensible around, Mrs. Carson said to Daniel. "I was beginning to think you had no taste at all. Sit down, Miss Vance. I will bring tea and pie." Adelaide sat at the scrubbed pine table, feeling slightly overwhelmed. Daniel took the chair across from her and grinned at her startled expression. "Mrs. Carson does not believe in subtle," he said. "You get used to it." "I am still here and can hear you," Mrs. Carson said from where she was slicing pie. "And I am not subtle because subtle is a waste of time. Life is too short for dancing around what you mean." She set generous slices of apple pie in front of them, along with cups of strong tea, then disappeared into another part of the house. Adelaide picked up her fork and took a bite. The pie was extraordinary, sweet and tart and perfectly spiced. "This is amazing," she said. "Mrs. Carson has strong opinions about pie, Daniel said. She says if you are going to bother making something, you should make it properly. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, and Adelaide felt herself relaxing further. The kitchen was warm and bright, full of copper pots and dried herbs, and it felt like a place where people actually lived rather than just existed. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said after a while. Adelaide nodded. "Why do you make yourself small like that?" "At the dance, the way you were standing when I first saw you, you were all folded up like you were trying to take up less space." Adelaide set down her fork, the question hitting closer than she expected. "Because that is what people prefer. When I take up the space I actually need, people notice. They comment, they make it clear that I am inconvenient. That sounds exhausting." "It is," Adelaide admitted, "but it is better than the alternative." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What is the alternative? Being too much? Too tall, too loud, too opinionated? Being the woman that men make jokes about, that mothers warn their daughters not to emulate." The words came out more bitter than Adelaide intended. "Being alone. You think making yourself smaller makes you less alone. I think it makes me less noticeable." "Adelaide," Daniel said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "You are noticeable no matter what you do. You are tall and you have a voice that carries and you laugh like you mean it. You can either spend your life apologizing for that, or you can decide it is not something that needs apologizing for." "Easy for you to say," Adelaide said. "You fit." "I am a cattle rancher in the Washington Territory trying to build something out of dirt and stubborn determination," Daniel said. "I left behind everything I knew because I did not fit there either. Nobody fits perfectly, Adelaide. The question is whether you are going to let other people's discomfort become your problem." Adelaide stared at him, something shifting uncomfortably in her chest. "You make it sound simple." "I did not say it was simple. I said it was a choice." Daniel reached across the table and touched her hand briefly. "And for what it is worth, I think you are just enough exactly as you are." The words landed soft and certain, and Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, not wanting to cry in this man's kitchen, but Daniel just waited patiently until she had herself under control. "I do not know how to believe that," Adelaide said finally. "Then maybe start by stopping the things that make you feel worse," Daniel suggested. "Stop hunching. Stop apologizing for your laugh. Stop pretending you do not have thoughts worth sharing. And if people do not like it," Daniel shrugged, "then they were never going to like you anyway, and you have saved yourself the effort of contorting into something you are not." It was such a pragmatic way of looking at it that Adelaide almost laughed. Almost, but not quite, because the idea of actually taking up space felt terrifying after so many years of trying not to. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the ranch. Daniel showed her around the property, introducing her to his foreman Jack and the ranch hands, all of whom treated her with easy courtesy. Daniel pointed out the new fence line he was building, the pasture where he planned to expand next year, the creek that ran through the northern section of the property. He talked about his plans with quiet enthusiasm, and Adelaide found herself genuinely interested in the mechanics of ranching, asking questions that Daniel answered thoroughly. As the sun began to lower, they rode back toward Republic. Adelaide felt different somehow, as if something had been shaken loose inside her. The ride back was quieter than the ride out, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that did not need filling. "Thank you for today," Adelaide said as they reached the edge of town. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said. "Would you like to do it again sometime?" Adelaide hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think I would." Daniel's smile was warm and genuine. "Good, how about next Saturday?" "All right." They made plans to meet, and Daniel rode off toward his ranch while Adelaide returned home. Her mother was in the parlor mending, and she looked up when Adelaide entered. "You were gone a long time," her mother said, not quite making it a question. "I went to see Daniel Whitmore's ranch," Adelaide said. "He invited me." Her mother's expression flickered with something Adelaide could not quite name. "That was kind of him." "It was," Adelaide agreed. "The ranch is beautiful. He built most of it himself." "Adelaide," her mother said carefully, setting down her mending, "I do not want you to get your hopes up. Mr. Whitmore seems like a decent man, but men do not always. That is, sometimes they are kind without meaning anything by it." "I know," Adelaide said, though the words stung. "But he asked me to come back next week." Her mother looked like she wanted to say more, but she just nodded and returned to her mending. Adelaide went to her small room and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything Daniel had said. About choices and fitting and being just enough. The next week, Adelaide tried to implement Daniel's advice in small ways. When she walked into the general store, she did not hunch her shoulders. When the shopkeeper's wife made a comment about the weather, Adelaide responded in her normal voice instead of the quieter one she usually adopted. When she laughed at something her father said at dinner, she did not immediately apologize for the sound. It felt strange and uncomfortable and sometimes terrifying, but Adelaide persisted. Saturday came, and Daniel appeared at the depot exactly when he said he would. They rode out to the ranch again, and this time Daniel put her to work helping him repair a section of fence. Adelaide had never done manual labor like this before, and she was terrible at it, but Daniel was patient, showing her how to stretch wire properly, how to hammer in staples without bending them. "You are better at this than you think," Daniel said as they worked side by side in the afternoon sun. "I have bent more staples than I have successfully hammered in," Adelaide pointed out, "but you are still trying. That counts for something." They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Daniel came to town every Saturday, and they spent the afternoons together, sometimes at the ranch, sometimes riding through the surrounding territory. Daniel introduced her to his friends, other ranchers and homesteaders, and Adelaide was surprised to find that most of them treated her with the same easy acceptance Daniel did. If they noticed her height, they did not comment on it. If they thought her voice was too loud, they did not say so. Slowly, incrementally, Adelaide began to believe that maybe Daniel was right. Maybe she did not need to make herself smaller. Maybe she could just exist as she was, and that would be acceptable. But the real test came 2 months after that first dance, when Republic held another social gathering. Adelaide almost did not go. The memory of the last dance, of Margaret Finch's cutting remarks and the whispered comments, made her want to stay home. But Daniel had mentioned he would be there, and Adelaide found herself dressing carefully, choosing her best dress, and for the first time in years, putting on heeled shoes that added another inch to her height. When she walked into the territorial hall that evening, she kept her shoulders back and her spine straight. It felt unnatural and terrifying, but she did it anyway. Daniel was standing near the refreshment table talking to Jack and another rancher. When he saw Adelaide, his face lit up, and he excused himself immediately to come to her. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Adelaide's cheeks warm. "I am taller than you in these shoes," Adelaide said, the old anxiety creeping back. Daniel glanced down at her heeled shoes, then back up at her face. "So you are. Does not bother me if it does not bother you." Before Adelaide could respond, Margaret Finch appeared at her elbow, Rosalind trailing behind as usual. "Miss Vance," Margaret said, her tone honeyed poison. "How brave of you to wear heels. Most women of your proportions would not dare." Adelaide felt the familiar instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make herself less. But then she remembered Daniel's words, remembered the afternoon they had spent fixing fence, remembered the way he had said she was just enough exactly as she was. "I like these shoes," Adelaide said, her voice clear and steady. "They are comfortable and they make me happy." Margaret's smile tightened. "Well, I suppose that is all that matters, though I do hope you will not monopolize Mr. Whitmore's attention again this evening. There are other young ladies who would enjoy a dance." "Actually," Daniel said, and his voice had that edge Adelaide had heard before, "I was planning to monopolize Adelaide's attention all evening if she is agreeable." "I am agreeable," Adelaide said quickly. Margaret's expression soured, but before she could respond, Jack appeared beside Daniel. "Evening, ladies," Jack said, tipping his hat. Then he turned to Daniel. "A bunch of the fellows were just talking about your new fence line. They are curious how you managed the slope on the south section." "It is not that complicated," Daniel said. "You just have to account for the grade when you are setting posts." "Maybe so, but they are all standing over there arguing about it," Jack said, gesturing to a group of men across the hall. "You should go explain it before someone starts a fight." Daniel looked torn between his obligations and his desire to stay with Adelaide. Adelaide touched his arm lightly. "Go," she said. "I will be fine." "You are sure?" "I am sure." Daniel squeezed her hand briefly, then went with Jack to settle the fencing debate. Adelaide stood alone, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt in her heeled shoes with her shoulders back. She could see women looking at her, whispering behind their hands. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight. But then she heard Daniel's voice carrying across the hall, explaining fence posts with the same patient enthusiasm he had shown when teaching her. She heard him laugh at something one of the other ranchers said, heard the respect in the other men's voices when they asked follow-up questions. He was exactly himself, unapologetic and genuine, and he had told her she could be the same. Adelaide took a deep breath and walked over to where several young women were sitting. They looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across their faces. "May I join you?" Adelaide asked, not bothering to soften her voice or make it quieter. There was a moment of awkward silence, then one of the women, Sarah, nodded. "Of course." Adelaide sat, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Sarah said, "I heard you have been spending time at the Whitmore Ranch." "I have," Adelaide said. "Daniel has been teaching me about ranching. It is fascinating work." "Is it true he is expanding his operation?" another woman, Ellen, asked. "He is planning to," Adelaide said. "He wants to add another 200 acres next year." The conversation began to flow, tentative at first, then more naturally. The women asked about the ranch, about Daniel, about Adelaide's thoughts on territorial politics, and the new school they were trying to establish. Adelaide answered honestly, not trying to soften her opinions or make them more palatable. When she laughed at something Sarah said, the sound was big and genuine, and Sarah grinned back at her as if the laugh was a compliment. By the time Daniel returned, Adelaide was deep in a debate with Ellen about whether the territory should invest in better roads or better water management first. Daniel listened for a moment, then held out his hand to Adelaide. "Dance with me," he asked. Adelaide excused herself and took his hand. On the dance floor, Daniel pulled her close, and Adelaide realized she was indeed taller than him in her heeled shoes. She waited for it to feel wrong, but it just felt like them. "You look happy," Daniel said as they moved through the first turn. "I am," Adelaide said, surprised to realize it was true. "I was talking to Sarah and Ellen about territorial development. They had interesting ideas." "You have interesting ideas," Daniel said. "I am glad you were sharing them." They danced several songs, and Adelaide noticed that the whispers had changed character. People were still watching them, but the quality of attention felt different, more curious than critical. When the music paused, Daniel did not let go of her hand. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." Daniel led her out onto the porch where it was quieter, away from the crowd. The night air was cool and sweet, full of pine and grass. Daniel turned to face her, still holding her hand. "I am not good at pretty speeches," Daniel said, "but I need you to know something. When I look at you, I do not see someone who is too much. I see someone who is exactly right. You are tall and you have a voice that carries and you laugh like you mean it, and all of that is part of what makes you who you are. I do not want you smaller or quieter or less. I want you exactly as you are." Adelaide's throat tightened. "Daniel, I am not finished," Daniel said gently. "I know you have spent a long time believing you need to shrink yourself to be acceptable. I know one rancher in the Washington Territory telling you otherwise does not erase years of being told you are wrong. But I am going to keep telling you anyway, for as long as it takes for you to believe it. You are just enough, Adelaide. You always have been." The tears Adelaide had been holding back spilled over, and she did not try to stop them. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Adelaide let herself lean into him, let herself take up space, let herself be held exactly as she was. "I am trying to believe it," Adelaide said against his shoulder. "It is just hard. I know," Daniel said, "but you are doing it. I see you doing it, and I am so proud of you I could burst." Adelaide laughed wetly and pulled back to look at him. "You are proud of me, constantly," Daniel said. "You are one of the bravest people I know." "I do not feel brave." "Brave people rarely do." Daniel brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Adelaide, I am going to ask you something, and I need you to take your time answering. I do not want you to feel pressured or rushed." Adelaide's heart kicked in her chest. "All right." "I love you," Daniel said, simple and direct. "I have loved you since that first dance when you laughed and looked terrified that you had. I love how passionate you get when you talk about things you care about. I love how hard you are trying to believe you are worth space in the world. I love you exactly as you are, and I do not want you any other way." He took a breath. "I would like you to consider staying in Republic. Not for me exactly, though I hope I am part of the equation, but staying because this place could be home if you let it. Because there are people here who will see you for who you are, not what they think you should be." Adelaide stared at him, her mind racing. She thought about the last few months, about the slow unfurling of something inside her chest. About learning to stand up straight, to laugh without apologizing, to have opinions without softening them. About the ranch and Mrs. Carson's blunt kindness, and the work of building something solid. "I do not know if I can be what you need," Adelaide said honestly. "I am still learning how to be myself without being afraid." "You do not need to be anything other than what you are," Daniel said. "And I will be here while you learn, for as long as you want me." Adelaide thought about leaving, about going to a city where she might blend in, where her height would be one oddity among many. It was what she had been planning before she met Daniel, the escape route she had been cultivating. But standing here in the cool night air with this man who saw her and wanted her exactly as she was, the city felt less like freedom and more like running away. "I love you too," Adelaide said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it." Daniel's smile was bright enough to light the whole territory. He cupped her face in his rough, gentle hands and kissed her, soft and certain, and Adelaide kissed him back, not worrying about who might see, not caring that she was taller in her heeled shoes, just existing in the moment exactly as she was. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to staying?" "It is a yes to trying," Adelaide said. "To seeing if I can build a life here, with you. "I will take it," Daniel said. They stayed on the porch for a long time, talking about the future in tentative, hopeful terms. Daniel talked about expanding the ranch, about building a bigger house if Adelaide wanted one, about the life they could create together. Adelaide talked about her fears, about the work she still needed to do to believe she was enough, about her hope that maybe she could. "We will figure it out together," Daniel said. "And on the days when you cannot believe it, I will believe it for you until you can again." It was exactly the right thing to say, and Adelaide felt something settle inside her, solid and sure. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Adelaide moved out of her parents' house and into a small cottage at the edge of the ranch that Daniel helped her fix up. She took a job at the depot managing freight logistics, using her organizational skills and loud voice to coordinate shipments across the territory. She continued to practice standing up straight, to laugh without apologizing, to share her opinions without softening them first. Some people in Republic never warmed to her. Margaret Finch continued to make cutting remarks, and there were always whispers about the too tall woman who had somehow caught the attention of Daniel Whitmore. But Adelaide learned to let those voices fade into background noise, unimportant compared to the people who did see her and value her. Daniel proposed properly 6 months later, on a clear October day when the mountains were dusted with the first snow of the season. They were riding through the northern pasture checking fence line when he stopped his horse and turned to her. "Marry me," he said, no preamble or pretty speech, just the plain truth of what he wanted. "Yes," Adelaide said, equally direct, and they sealed it with a kiss while their horses waited patiently. They were married in the spring of 1884, a small ceremony at the ranch with Adelaide's parents and Daniel's foreman and Mrs. Carson as witnesses. Adelaide wore her heeled shoes and a simple dress that her mother had made, and she stood straight and tall beside Daniel as they exchanged vows. When the traveling preacher pronounced them married, Daniel kissed her thoroughly, and Adelaide laughed her big, unrestrained laugh, and no one told her to be quieter. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and compromise and build a life together. Daniel was patient with Adelaide's bad days when the old voices came back, the ones that said she was too much, too loud, too tall. He reminded her gently but firmly that she was just enough, that he loved her exactly as she was, that she did not need to shrink for anyone. Adelaide learned to let herself be loved. It was harder than she expected, accepting that someone could genuinely want all of her, the parts she had spent years trying to hide. But Daniel was consistent, steady, his love as reliable as sunrise, and slowly Adelaide began to believe him. She also learned that she loved ranching. She had a knack for organization and planning, and she took over managing the ranch's finances and logistics, freeing Daniel to focus on the physical work of running cattle and maintaining the property. Together they made a good team, their strengths complementing each other. A year after their wedding, Republic held another social gathering. Adelaide dressed carefully, choosing a new dress that she had sewn herself, a deep blue that made her eyes bright. She put on her heeled shoes without hesitation and walked into the territorial hall with her shoulders back and her head high. The room was full of familiar faces, and Adelaide felt none of the anxiety that had plagued her 2 years earlier. She saw Sarah and Ellen and went to join them, and they greeted her warmly, immediately pulling her into their conversation. Daniel was across the room talking to Jack and several other ranchers, but he looked up as if he could sense Adelaide's presence. Their eyes met, and he smiled, warm and proud, and Adelaide felt her heart swell. When the music started, Daniel came to her immediately and held out his hand. Adelaide took it without hesitation, and they walked onto the dance floor together. Adelaide was taller in her heeled shoes, her head above Daniel's, and she did not care at all. "You look happy," Daniel said as they began to move through the familiar steps. "I am happy," Adelaide said. "I am exactly where I want to be." "Good," Daniel said. "Because I am exactly where I want to be too." They danced several songs, and when Adelaide laughed at something Daniel said, the sound rang out clear and bright across the hall. Several people turned to look, but Adelaide did not try to quiet herself. She just laughed harder, joy bubbling up unstoppable, and Daniel grinned at her like she was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. Margaret Finch, standing along the wall, made some comment to the woman beside her, but Adelaide did not hear it and would not have cared if she had. Margaret's opinions had stopped mattering somewhere along the way, rendered irrelevant by Adelaide's hard-won confidence. The dance ended, and Daniel led Adelaide off the floor. They stood together near the open doors where the night air drifted in, cool and pine-scented, and Adelaide looked around the room that had once felt so hostile and realized it felt like home now. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going to the city?" Adelaide considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I would have felt less conspicuous somewhere bigger. But no, I do not regret it. This is where I needed to be to figure out who I am." "And who are you?" Daniel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Someone who is just enough," Adelaide said, the words feeling true in a way they had not before. "Exactly as I am." Daniel's smile was brilliant. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Exactly as you are," he agreed. They stayed at the dance until late, talking and laughing with friends, and when they finally rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Adelaide felt peaceful in a way she had never expected to feel. The work of believing in herself was not finished and probably never would be, but she was doing it. Every day she was doing it, and that was enough. Over the years that followed, Adelaide and Daniel built a life that was rich and full and exactly theirs. They expanded the ranch, adding land and cattle, becoming one of the more prosperous operations in the territory. Adelaide continued to manage the business side of things, and she developed a reputation as a shrewd negotiator and skilled organizer. People stopped commenting on her height and started commenting on her competence. She and Daniel never had children, a decision they made together after several long conversations about what they wanted from life. They poured their energy into the ranch, into each other, into building something lasting and good. Mrs. Carson stayed on as housekeeper and became like family, her blunt affection a constant presence. Adelaide became involved in territorial politics, advocating for better infrastructure and education. She spoke at town meetings in her loud, carrying voice, and people listened because she had something worth saying. She made friends, real friends who valued her for who she was, and she learned to value herself in return. But the moment that mattered most came 5 years after their wedding at another dance. Adelaide was 32 now, more confident in her skin than she had ever been. She wore heeled shoes as a matter of course, never bothered to hunch her shoulders, laughed as loud as she wanted. She was talking to a group of women when a young girl, maybe 18 or 19, approached hesitantly. The girl was tall, easily 6 feet, and she stood with the hunched, apologetic posture Adelaide remembered too well. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. "Are you Mrs. Whitmore?" "I am," Adelaide said, smiling. "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to say," the girl stopped, took a breath. "I wanted to say thank you, for being yourself, for not hiding. It helps to see someone who is tall like me and does not seem ashamed of it." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at this girl who was where Adelaide had been years ago, small and scared and trying to disappear, and she understood viscerally what Daniel had given her that night he first asked her to dance. "What is your name?" Adelaide asked. "Mary," the girl said. "Mary Thompson." "It is nice to meet you, Mary." Adelaide took the girl's hand and squeezed it gently. "Can I tell you something?" Mary nodded. "You are not too tall," Adelaide said firmly. "You are not too much. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are. It is going to take time to believe that, and some days you will not believe it at all, but it is true. You do not need to make yourself smaller for anyone." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "People say—" "I know what people say," Adelaide interrupted gently. "They said the same things about me. But the people whose opinions actually matter will see you for who you are, not what they think you should be. The rest are just noise." "How did you learn to believe it?" Mary asked. Adelaide glanced across the room to where Daniel stood talking to Jack, then looked back at Mary. "I had help. People who saw me and valued me and refused to let me hide. And I practiced. Every day I practiced standing up straight, speaking in my normal voice, taking up the space I actually needed. It was terrifying and uncomfortable, and sometimes I failed, but I kept doing it, and eventually it became true." Mary nodded slowly, something like hope flickering across her face. "Thank you," she said again. "Come find me sometime," Adelaide said. "If you want to talk or if you just need a reminder that you are enough, come to the Whitmore Ranch. I am always happy to have visitors." Mary promised she would, and Adelaide watched her walk away a little straighter than she had arrived. Daniel appeared at Adelaide's elbow a moment later. "That was good what you did," he said quietly. "I just told her the truth," Adelaide said. "The same truth you told me." "And look how far you have come," Daniel said. He took her hand and kissed it. "I am so proud of you." "I am proud of me too," Adelaide said, and realized she meant it. "I am proud of who I have become." The music started up again, and Daniel led her onto the dance floor. Adelaide moved through the familiar steps with easy confidence, her head held high, her shoulders back. She was tall and loud and opinionated, and she was exactly enough. She always had been. When she laughed at something Daniel said, the sound rang out clear and joyful across the hall, and Adelaide did not try to soften it or apologize for it. She just let it be, let herself be, exactly as she was. Daniel pulled her closer, his eyes warm with love and pride. "There it is," he said softly. "That laugh, that is my favorite sound in the world." "You are ridiculous," Adelaide said, but she was smiling. "I am in love," Daniel corrected. "With you, exactly as you are." And Adelaide, who had spent so many years believing she was too much, finally understood that for Daniel, for the people who mattered, for herself, she was just enough. She was home.